Good evening. You're on the smoking section, and I'm very happy to have my good friend and fellow member of Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights, Paul Neff. How are you, Paul?
Pretty good. Had kind of a stressful day, but I don't want to go into it.
You don't want to go into it?
No, I want to proceed right to the topics.
Well, I mean, I don't have that many topics, but you know, I try to keep the show pretty close on the tobacco issues because, frankly, one time I had a guest on who was kind of political, anti-Israel, and he, you know, which is fine. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that political stance, but one of my very loyal listeners said, well, I should keep it on tobacco. So I kind of do, but there's a woman here, Paul, whose name is Sherry, and she's a cablecaster. Have you met her? You may have met her before.
I might have met her.
And she gave me a hard time one night because I was saying, you know, that they really didn't have any kind of mechanical proof that, or the mechanism by which smoking supposedly raised risks. And she said to me, oh, well, no, they've got some studies, and that, it's proven, quote, end of quote, that it causes DNA damage.
Well, that's a new one on me. I remember chromosome damage, which was attributed to LSD.
Oh, that was a long time ago. That was a long
time ago, and it was never retracted so much as just forgotten because it wasn't true. It was
we don't know if it's true or not.
It doesn't seem to have been true. And on the internet, discussion of psychedelics has taken on a much more sober tone now that the government's not trying to whip up hysteria.
Well, it's interesting because I did some internet researching, which I brought up on the show before, but for lack of anything better, I'll bring up again. And these are the things that I found that are supposed to cause DNA damage, which of course is very frightening. You know, when you tell a member of the public, well, oh, you might have DNA damage.
I think they'd have to spell it out a little bit more to get me alarmed.
Really?
Yeah. Is this something that normally occurs anyway?
What, DNA damage?
Yeah. I mean, like, to what extent and with what ramifications?
I don't know. All I know is it's one of those things that's used to kind of control behavior, and it's thrown out to the public. I mean, at least in my view, it's thrown out to the public because it can elicit this kind of response. So I went online to find out what can cause DNA damage, supposedly. And I found that stress can cause DNA damage.
Right.
PTSD can cause DNA damage. Eating red meat and dairy foods cause DNA damage. Sunlight, even after the sun goes down, can cause DNA damage.
And again, that's allegedly.
Allegedly. Artificially sweetened sodas, non-artificially sweetened sodas.
Right. Well, that's typical, and that's like it plays right into my hands because I'm not going to talk about anything that can't be observed.
Yeah, that's an important thing
by anybody. And I think anybody, if you want to kind of distance yourself from propaganda to get a certain emotional response, look around. First of all, look around and remember things. Remember the history. Like, for example, the thing about chromosome damage. The, three-headed babies, they just never materialized.
Right.
Whereas with thalidomide, which happened in the 1950s, it happened.
Right. In other words,
no one had to say this is going to happen.
Women who used thalidomide did show, I don't even know too much about the science about that, but it seemed to affect some babies. We had, when you and I were growing up, there were certain, we would every once in a while run into somebody who had attenuated limbs because he or she or her or his mother had ingested thalidomide.
Yep, I knew somebody like that.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah. His arms were like about that.
Oh, wow.
By the way, he smoked.
You mean this particular person? Well, that's good.
I hope he's still doing
well. I'm glad
to
hear that. And was he in your school, your high school or something?
He was the brother of a girl I went to school with.
Well, the last two things are kind of like about this DNA addiction is well, the DNA damage, opioid addiction can cause DNA damage. I don't know if I said that. But the last two are kind of funny because supposedly, according to the BBC, a study that they reported on, a sedentary lifestyle can result in DNA damage.
By my observation, since childhood, I think the sedentary lifestyle is the most dangerous thing.
Well, for DNA damage?
No, for health in general. DNA I don't know about, but I mean, people who've died prematurely, from what I've seen, it was either unexpected and due to a defect of the heart that was not known, or the person was very sedentary and overweight.
Yeah.
Well, that goes for deaths like from, say, 40s to 70s.
Well, Samuel Johnson once used to say, or said that he knew many alcoholics who lived to be old, but he didn't know a glutton who lived to be old. Which, of course, is... but then again, I've known some heavy people who have lived to be quite old, actually.
Sure. Well, just because you're heavy doesn't mean your weight is not right for your bone structure, or that you're inactive.
Well...
Or that your girth is just poison,
Right, on this last...
Some people are healthily... like the government and the media and the medical establishment, every now and then they get fixated on a certain idea and they push it, and they assume the public is very stupid and that they can be sort of made to feel a certain way about certain things, controlled, in other words.
Right, and I've that expression, a moral panic?
Yes.
And I think the anti-smoking movement is quintessentially a moral panic. I mean, because it's like, well, of course, we have this argument how successful it's been, but before we get into that, and it's funny because the last thing that causes DNA damage from sedentary lifestyle is exhaustive exercise, also causes DNA damage. So, if you believe these studies, which, of course, these researchers are doing, and they're looking for grant money, and they're looking for attention and getting it. Just about anything, if you want to, you can come up with research that will seem to show that just about anything causes DNA damage. So I'm going to take...
Here's what I think, and it goes right along with what I think, is that the amount of real anti-smoking sentiment that they were able to generate with the public, first of all, it wasn't satisfactory to them, which is why we have more and more laws. Restricting smoking, raising the age, and now they're trying to raise the idea, trying to say that you're not an adult until you're not only 21 but maybe 27 or something like that. So what that suggests to me is they've run out of material with which to generate moral panics.
Vis-a-vis tobacco?
I mean, the idea that smoke can be harmful to your respiratory tract is kind of an intuitive sort of idea. It makes sense. Just like the idea that drinking, harms your liver. It's in the folklore.
Yes, true.
People have always felt that way. But like when you get down to the idea that you're not an adult capable of making decisions till you're over 25.
Well, let's just say 21.
Or that smoking damages DNA, and like this is hot off the press. This is a new one. Maybe you want to like reconsider your ideas about personal freedom and stuff on this basis. It suggests to me that they've gotten to the bottom of their bag of tricks.
Well,
they can't really do anything further without doing what they did to marijuana in the 70s when they sprayed it with paraquat.
Well,
they could make it worse.
I hope you're right. I mean, the time will tell. We've had this argument back and forth. I mean, has anti-smoking propaganda peaked, or has it not peaked? I don't know. You think it has. I hope you're right. We'll see what happens. We'll see how things go. Of course, our organization is working to reverse that, but let's just see. I mean, that's
not to say that the political establishment isn't totally sold on it.
Well, no,
there's evidence. I hear that Timothy
James Timothy.
James Timothy is against raising the age of purchasing tobacco he's against raising it from 18 to 21.
Right. Now, you called it, okay, so this is something Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights should definitely take a stand on, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
Now, would you be willing to go to the State House and testify against it?
I plan to when it comes up. Yeah.
Right.
I always do.
Do you like going to public hearings?
Yeah, and that's something I think everybody, pardon my dry mouth, but I think everybody should try that.
Go to public hearings.
See how business is conducted.
Well, let me ask you, you know, a lot of people, they go to public hearings and they say, oh, well, I get bored, it takes a long time, it's one person says one thing and one person says another thing. How would you respond to those people who voice that view?
Well, with me, to be perfectly honest, what I was afraid of at first was that the other side had arguments that I didn't know about.
Oh, really?
And that my position, maybe I'd find out it was kind of naive or manipulated or something like. This was a long time ago, by the way.
Right.
What I found out was that people that want to impose new laws against smoking, you know, since, say, like 2000,
yes,
to like make sure that there is no nightclub that allows smoking,
right,
no private club, you know, they want to go all the way with
that's
this.
correct.
They're working on the outdoors now, but they will not debate the reasons why they think
right.
This is necessary. They won't even fully explain them.
Right, right. Well, it's up to us.
So there's nothing to be afraid of.
It's up to us to go there and to use these forums to challenge their views. And so, but my question to you is, and it's a simple question, I mean, do you find it, sometimes you have to be very patient at these, I mean, that the democracy works, you know, in a slow way. It's like not, you go to your meeting and you stay 5 minutes and say your thing and you leave. You sometimes have to wait for an hour or an hour and a half to get your opportunity to speak.
Well,
you're okay with that?
It's interesting. It's interesting.
Oh, you find it interesting. You find the democratic process interesting.
Well, it's interesting and it's kind of inspiring because you find out that your neighbors, you know, your friends,
yes,
you have intelligent observations, a lot of valid points, and hearing them is inspiring, and it's also infuriating to see a city council or board of health totally ignore them.
Well, you know, I don't think they do.
I think they do take note of how many of us show up.
Right, and I think our Cambridge City Councilors heard what we had to say. And
I think they saw that mental health groups, for instance, people that advocate for the mentally ill and the homeless, agreed with us.
Right.
And people that were there to talk about other issues, when they saw that we were there and heard our points, got up and agreed with us. They saw that. They can't ignore it. They
didn't ignore it because they significantly...
No, they didn't ignore it.
In fact, McGovern, who was who sponsored the bill to ban smoking in the parks, came up with a extremely conciliatory compromise. So evidently, they heard us, and you know, it's not as if, I mean, that's the way politics works. I mean, you hear one side and you hear the other side, and you observe, you observe how many people are on each side, but you also listen to the arguments.
Right, and I'm not the only one. I didn't feel, and I haven't felt, that the people that are really gung-ho about pushing through these laws are that interested in like hearing our arguments,
well, they're the opposite side,
or responding to them. But I mean, they don't even have the honor to engage, and we know this now. We know that their policy is not to engage in debate.
Right. Now, you know, so we have this 21-year-old thing, you know, where the state of Massachusetts is considering raising the age to 21, and other states are too.
Yeah.
And some people are pushing the federal government to raise the age to 21. The one difficulty I have with this is in formulating arguments against it?
Well, for one thing, you know, I hooked up with Facebook kind of late, but like about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I looked up old friends of mine, and like the people who were my friends, disproportionately maybe, started smoking early.
Right.
Like 16 or even younger.
Yes.
And everyone I can think of is still alive and well and successful and healthy and so forth.
Do you think it's...
And that's valid. I mean,
Let me ask you a question. Do you think it's... do you think it's possible that if they hadn't have started smoking in their teens or early teens, that they would not have been as successful or as well as they are now?
Well, let me put it this way. We don't really know. My friends who've hooked up with me on Facebook tended to have always been like the bright kids in school.
Yes.
A little bit rebellious. And they did other things like smoke pot.
Yeah.
And take LSD.
They were
things like that. And,
yes.
And they were also literate. Various things like that. So I really don't know which factor it is why they are doing so well. But it just appears to me that, you know, whether their thing is raising a family or becoming wealthy, whatever it is, or thinking or being spiritual, it seems like everybody's found a good niche.
Now, let me just, for myself, you know, I think that if I had not found tobacco at an early age, and had not started smoking, I think it's possible that I might be in, you know, I'm not going to say that I'm like a prize package.
Yeah.
But I think that I have been able to deal with a lot of the vicissitudes that life has thrown at me, and maybe some of my limitations, etc.
Neither one of us has had any serious diseases.
Right, thank God.
Yeah.
Better than if I had not started smoking. You know, because, you know, maybe I would have required a lot more psychoactive medications, which I might have gotten addicted to, or, you know, it's just, what I'm saying is that, you know, let's just say, for sake of argument, that I have raised the risk of certain illnesses, you know, that I might get X, Y, or Z a little bit more likely than someone who didn't smoke. But maybe there were compensating things. Maybe it's helped me deal with some of my limitations that if I had not have smoked, I would not be in as good a shape as I am now.
It's possible. It's possible.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's entirely possible. Also, maybe the fact that when you were young and you had that urge to smoke, you didn't meet with the repression that you would today. You know, you were allowed that self-expression, you know.
And not only
like when you're young, when you're in your teens, it can mean a lot to be treated as an adult in a significant way. To have a drink with your dad, you know. Right. To smoke pot with
We're getting more and more where the government is becoming more and more paternalistic.
Yeah.
And I like to mention that, for example, when I graduated from high school and I went to my prom, none of the kids in my class were told not to drink. They weren't told not to have safe sex or to have safe sex or what have you.
Or anything about
nothing about drugs. We didn't wear seat belts. Nobody was told not to smoke. And yet nobody in my class at the prom got drunk or, you know, got an automobile accident. You know, so in other words, we all were acting as pretty adult people. Now
I think repression doesn't make people act like adults, you know.
Really?
I think it thwarts the process. Like if you're allowed to drink and you're allowed to consider it an adult activity, you can also learn what a hangover is. You can also learn that it's never a good idea to get blind drunk. Whereas if under repression, the whole thing becomes
when we graduated, we were all 17 and 18.
Right.
And at that time, the New York State alcohol laws was you could drink at 18, but we all drank at 17 or 18. And I remember going out with several people, you know, several couples on my prom night, and we went to a bar and we had a few drinks. None of us got intoxicated.
Right.
you know? And
it's not such a novelty. You know how to handle it. You know how.
You know, so
your
I don't
body-
know, why do you think that the government is so, or why do you think that there are forces in our society, not just the government, but including other, who are so intent upon being paternalistic these days as opposed to those days?
Well, it's complicated.
But why is there this push to be paternalistic so much?
Well, it's authoritarian is what I would call it. It seems like authoritarianism is very popular. You know, Hillary Clinton has introduced the idea of censoring the internet, and which, you know, to those of us that don't think there's anything meaningful in the mainstream media, in the newspapers and stuff like that, or very little. You know,
Right.
it's a major source of information.
To be fair to
consolation.
To be fair to Hillary Clinton, I think she's talking about censoring the internet vis-a-vis terrorist groups.
Right. Well, the Patriot Act was.
Well, let's just stick to let's just stick to, you know, censoring the internet vis-a-vis terrorist groups. I mean, you can see the argument in favor of that, right?
Yeah, but what we always have to watch out for is politicians. It's in the nature of the beast. They like to increase their authority.
Well, that's true.
And a good way to do it is when there's an opportunity to create a moral panic where you're afraid of your own freedom. You know, you think that the threat is freedom.
Right.
Whether it's the internet or privacy, whatever.
But there is definitely a threat, a terrorist threat going on in the world today. I mean,
There sure is.
I mean, right now, I think 30 people were killed yesterday in Belgium. So, you know, there is this threat from ISIS that a lot of people are worried about. I mean, I don't know. I just don't know. I mean, I think there's a good argument that the internet should be censored from these terrorist groups, but then there's the countervailing argument, which is when the government starts doing that, when do they stop?
Well, it always seemed to me it'd be more reasonable to keep an eye on who comes into the country and how many.
But
it has always seemed that way.
Let's not get off the subject of internet censorship.
Yeah.
Now, when you said Hillary Clinton introduced, she was talking about ISIS, right?
Yeah.
Do you see a good argument for that? I'm not saying you agree with it. I'm simply saying, do you see a good argument for that?
I think we ought to take a look at it, yeah.
Okay.
Potentially, there is a good argument, but, you know, a lot of danger.
Right, that's a good point. When we go into discuss this raising the age to 21, you know, everyone always brings up, well, you can, you know, fight in the military, and you can do this, sign a contract, you can marry, you can vote. Are there any other good arguments against raising the age to 21? You know, because those arguments have been made, and they should be made, but can you think of another good argument? Because I can only think of one, basically.
Well, there is a long tradition, you know, like when I was young and when you were young, the age was 16, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was where I lived. And that seemed reasonable. Mm-hmm. And it's very, like I said, it's very important to a teenager to go through these rites of passage towards adulthood. It means an awful lot.
We have to say goodbye to our viewership. Thanks for watching the smoking section. We're on every Wednesday, 7 p.m. And thanks to Paul Neff for appearing on the show tonight.
Anytime.
Thank you, Paul.
Sure.